はい、皆さん、こんにちは。
Good morning. And this is Tetsunari Ida, chairperson of ISAP. Today, we are commemorating the 11th year from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant's accident. And we are now, witnessing the crisis unfolding in Ukraine because of the Russia's invasion, and the energy situation is rapidly changing. Of course, in order to achieve decarbonization, it's very important to talk about the energy. So we have invited the Bill Nussey, who is the author of Freeing Energy. When I first saw this book title, I thought it was a strange name. And last year, I heard about this book, Dr. Robbins of RMI, who is my longtime friend. And I heard about this book through the RMI letter. And what is very important is that although the climate change is a very important issue facing the humanity right now, and what was described in the RMI letter was that this book is not about climate change, but it's about energy and economics, and especially about money. That was the focus of the description. And I thought that it perfectly fits our activities. And so I ordered the book through the Kindle, and then I began to contact the author, Mr. Bill Nussey. And when I read the book, I thought that this is the kind of book that we would like all people to read in Japan too. So we hastily translated the book into Japanese. So the next slide, please. So after this, Bill, we will play the lecture by Bill Nussey, and Bill Nussey is now the representative of the Freeing Energy. And what's interesting about his background is that he is from the IT background, and he was an entrepreneur as well as an investor, and he made successes in both. And about 10 years ago, then he moved into the area of renewable energy. So looking from the IT world, what's happening right now and what's going to happen in the future will be a major transformation. That's what he describes in the book. And his talk is very insightful, I think. So before going into Bill's lecture, let me make some housekeeping announcements. First of all, about the book, you can purchase the book in the Kindle version or the paperback version from Amazon and from this site. So Freeing Energy is the title of the book. So for more than 1 century, the giant energy companies, which are called in the book the big grid, and the situation is the same in Japan too, and how we are going to shift that to a more community-based local energy system. And it's very exciting what he argues in the book. And some housekeeping announcements. First of all, please mute your microphone, and also please keep your video off. And we are providing the simultaneous interpretation, so you can select the language that you want from the globe mark that you find at the bottom of the screen. And if you have questions, please send them to the Q&A box. And after the lecture, we will take up some questions from the floor. So anytime you can send your question through the Q&A box. And if you also pay attention to the chat, because we will be sending some messages through the chat box. And as for the presentation of Bill's lecture, that can be downloaded from the ICEP website. And then this is recorded, and so this recording will be uploaded onto the YouTube later. And we also would like to ask for your cooperation in filling out the questionnaire after the seminar. And as you can see, you can listen to the language interpretation. You can choose either English or Japanese. So let us move on to Bill's lecture. Please start.
Well, hello and welcome. My name is Bill Nussey. I am the author of Freeing Energy, a book about the transformational change in how we generate and consume electricity around the world. I am truly honored to be here today and to share what I've learned from the book, including a bit of my own personal story, to all of you in Japan for the very first time. I have to thank my collaborator, Tetsu, who helped make this event possible and helped me translate with many of his colleagues the book into Japanese, which will be available either by the time you see this or shortly afterwards. But I'm very excited to share how the book came together and why I wrote it. So let me start at the beginning. Back in 2014, I had just sold my company called Silverpop to IBM, and we were doing interviews with the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times and other business media talking about how Silverpop was going to become a marketing cloud for IBM. It was an amazing day, and I decided to step away and sit by myself for a moment to take it all in so I could remember it. Well, as I sat there and thought about what this meant for my career and my life, I was overcome with a feeling that all these people I had met through my life that had given so much of their time and energy, many of them did not have the career and the network and the contacts and the financial comfort that I did. And how could I do anything less than they were doing? So I set off on a quest to find something to spend the rest of my life doing that mattered, that could make a real difference. I wanted to accomplish three things. I wanted to help the planet and the environment. I wanted to help the millions or hundreds of millions of people whose lives are not all they could be and are disadvantaged for reasons of wealth or health or where they live. But I also am a capitalist, and I wanted to pursue something that could make a big financial impact. And I came across clean energy, and I was extremely excited about it. Clean energy will reverse the damage that our energy systems have been making on the planet. It will improve the lives of the 770 million people that have no electricity at all today, and another billion to 1.5 billion where electricity is sporadic, unavailable, or unaffordable. And the third box was checked. The transition to clean energy will be the biggest business opportunity in history. When I ask people what they think the largest infrastructure projects in the United States are, they often say, correctly, that it was the development of the US highway system over 30 years for about $550 billion. A lot of people are surprised to learn that over the last 25 years, a total of $1 trillion in venture capital money has been invested in companies in early internet and mobile and things like that. But all of those numbers are dwarfed by what's coming. The smallest estimate of the money that will be invested to facilitate the transition to clean energy is $17 trillion in the next 25 years. This is 10, 20 times more money than humans have ever put into anything we have accomplished as a species. This is incredibly exciting. And if the governments of the world with the United States and China and others start to aggressively work to slow climate change and reverse it, the $17 trillion could be as much as twice as large. This is the largest opportunity for business people in the history of the world. So how do I get into clean energy? What role could I play? What were the opportunities? So I spent 5 years traveling around to 6 countries, interviewed 320 people, and gathered up hundreds of spreadsheets and documents and articles, all of which are notated in my book. I traveled to China to sit with the leaders and founders of the largest solar companies in the world. I traveled to Africa, East Africa, and sat with people who had never had electricity in their lives or people that had just recently got it, and learned the tremendous benefits that electrification provided for them in their lives. I went to Europe to see solar manufacturing and science and cutting edge technology. This is a picture from one of the most automated solar cell and module manufacturer facilities in the world. I even got to climb to the top of a wind turbine. I went to visit one of the startups that is creating fusion energy. And there's several of these right now. Some of them are very exciting. I went to the US government's Department of Energy facilities. This is a picture from the National Renewable Energy Labs out in Colorado in the US, where I sat down with leaders and scientists to talk about new technologies for solar. And my book starts with the story of when I went down to Puerto Rico and met with people in several small towns that had been hit hard by Hurricane Maria, many of whom had been without electricity for 9 months. And the reason I went to these towns is that they had recently built schools with microgrids that were able to operate independently of the failing Puerto Rico grid and be able to run their classes and also take care of their communities when the power grid was unavailable. So what did I learn? Well, it wasn't good news. The energy systems that we have today are very outdated and broken. Our efforts to upgrade these systems will take decades, which is far too long to address the urgent need to reverse climate change. I learned some other really terrifying details. I didn't realize just how fragile the grid is. Here in the US, we see increasing numbers of outages, like in Texas, where a cold snap caused the power grid to go down for days, killing hundreds of people. Obviously, Puerto Rico a few years earlier. California has their grid go down regularly, and oftentimes because the utility is actually forcing it to turn off for safety reasons. Cyber attacks, the grid issues and the harm done by the Fukushima nuclear power plant meltdown, the list goes on and on. And yet, if you listen to the world's leaders, including the President of the United States, the answer is that we need to build enormous, large-scale power systems, giant power plants, wind, solar, maybe some natural gas and nuclear. The problem is that transmission lines take years and years and years to build. In the US right now, the average time for a transmission line to be approved and built is 4 years from when it starts. And it takes many years just to create a proposal. 75% of the transmission projects drop out because they run out of time and money. And the largest grid operator in the United States just recently requested permission to delay all transmission projects for 2 years, meaning that the newest transmission project in their region wouldn't go online until 2027. So this is very difficult to reconcile with the urgent need to address climate change now. But nobody seems to be pointing this out. No one seems to realize that all the methods to rapidly address climate change will take a decade, and none more so than nuclear. The fastest and newest plant to be built in the United States is just a pilot test project by a small modular reactor company called NuScale. And this pilot isn't anticipated to go live until 2029. And it would be another decade if everything went incredibly well for that project to be multiplied into tens and hundreds of gigawatts of energy which are needed. And even if everything works, even the advocates of nuclear agree that nuclear will be 2 to 3 times, maybe 3 or 4 times more expensive than solar. But the part that I found most agonizing and difficult was the fact that the electricity industry has atrophied. It has stagnated. Innovation has completely stopped. And I illustrate this with a story in my book. I imagine that I have a time machine and I go back in time and I find the Wright brothers, the inventor of powered flight. And I say to them, come into 2022 and let me show you what the airplane has become. I would take them on a trip on a 747 or an F-15 fighter jet and say, look what your invention has created. I would go back to Charles Babbage and say, come and look what computers are today. I would go to Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, and I would say, look at what your invention has become 100 years later. This one single device can access the sum total of all human knowledge with just fingertip presses. You can reach any one of billions of human beings with simply typing in 10 numbers. This simple invention of yours has changed the world. But yet, if I went back and talked to Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla and brought them forward 100 years, they would look around at a substation or a coal plant and they would say, wait a minute, this is exactly the same. Nothing has changed. How could you have all these other technologies that have dramatically progressed and innovated to mind-boggling levels, and yet the power industry has remained almost identical for 100 years? And I found this extremely distressing. And how can this be? How can this one industry have ground to a halt in terms of innovation? Well, we actually have the technology today to change the way that power is generated around the world. But the problem isn't the technology, it's the business model. Everywhere in the world, including and starting with the US, the electricity industry is run by a regulated monopoly or a state-run monopoly that was created as a business model in the early 1900s, and it remains nearly unchanged. In most places in the world, there's absolutely no competition for better, more innovative ways to create electricity. In the US, the profits of the electricity companies are guaranteed. In the US, people find this surprising, but in my book, I cite many sources to say that of all the industries in the United States, including used car dealerships and restaurants, the electricity industry spends less money on research and development than any other industry, less than 0.1% of their revenue. And in striking contrast, depending on whose numbers you look at, the electricity industry is the largest spender of lobbying money, lobbying regulators and legislators and elected officials. They're either the first or fourth largest spender of lobbying money in the United States across all industries. And as an engineer, I just struggle to realize that the brilliant invention that Thomas Edison and later Nikola Tesla with AC power, 60 hertz, 110 volts, remains identical to what he created 100 years ago, or actually 120, 140 years ago. So it's easy to get frustrated. And when I was doing my research on the book, I became very sad because I was concerned that this industry would never live up to its potential. It would never embrace innovation. It would never move into the 21st century like so many other industries have. But with more research, I found that there is a better path. It's one of the biggest trends in the world that's absolutely going to happen, and almost nobody sees it coming. In my very early research, I put together some ideas, and I had the privilege of sharing them on the TED stage, and you can go watch that. Although I would tell you that the ideas have come a very long way since that TED Talk, and the opportunities are so much larger than I realized when I did that speech 3 or 4 years ago. The next $1 trillion technology disruption is going to be what I call local energy, community solar, rooftop solar, building integrated photovoltaics, microgrids, and small-scale batteries. Any system where the generation of electricity and the storage of electricity is taking place in the same home or the same campus or the same community where that same electricity is being consumed. For most people, this is just one more small piece of the electricity puzzle. But what I have discovered is this is an entirely new industry with entirely new business opportunities entirely new competitive landscapes, requiring and benefiting from new regulations. And this is the opportunity to move electricity more quickly into the future, to bring innovation to an industry that has stagnated, and to create business opportunities that will attract billions, hundreds of billions of dollars for investors and entrepreneurs. So just to give you a quick comparison between the grid that was invented by Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse and regulated by Samuel Insull, in comparing that to where the world is going to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years. The old grid, what I call in the book the big grid, was controlled by giant corporations. In the future, many of the parts of the grid are going to be controlled by families and communities and individuals and campuses. The old grid, the 20th century grid, the electricity prices have been steadily rising, and in most places in the world, those prices are expected to continue rising. In the new world of local energy, families will see lower prices, and those prices will be locked in for years and years, because once the solar panel is built, you simply pay it off and it generates electricity for no money at all. And when the financing is completely paid off, all the electricity is actually free. The 20th century grid is defined by fuels, coal, gas, uranium. In the 21st century grid, local energy is defined by technologies, solar and batteries. The old grid, when you're building giant wind farms and solar farms, doesn't employ many people. But when you build small-scale systems, in the US, rooftop solar and community solar and commercial solar create 10 times more jobs than the large-scale projects. And in the United States, jobs are one of the most important goals. And yet nobody in the government is talking about just how many jobs can be created with this kind of small-scale local energy. And one of the reasons we're not doing anything in the United States and most of the world is that in order to make these large-scale systems work, we have to pass massive, complex, contentious changes in policy. And in the United States, nothing's getting done. Whereas the small-scale systems are regulated locally at the city and county and state level, and they can move much more quickly and require only minor changes in regulation. And in fact, they are already moving very aggressively with the regulations as they exist today. Local energy is not waiting on regulations. Across the United States, outages are happening more frequently. Everybody agrees that small-scale local energy systems that include batteries are the best way to deal with outages at the grid level, but yet there's no large focus on this. There's no national focus and no recognition that this is actually a complete solution that can be put in place. But most concerning for those of us that are watching climate change seem to get worse and worse every year is that every solution being discussed, transmission, nuclear, large-scale wind and solar farms, take 5, 6, 10 years to develop its scale. It takes 4, 5, 6 years to put up a new solar project, a large-scale solar project today. But yet a rooftop solar can be put up in a matter of days. And if you include permitting and financing, it can be done in a matter of weeks. And again, no one's recognizing the speed with which we can build local energy, yet it's the fastest solution available to us. This is why I wrote the book. This is why I'm so excited to share the book with all of you in Japan, because if you're listening to this, you probably realize this opportunity exists. You're frustrated by the lack of knowledge and support, and I hope that my book will lend additional voice and credibility to those of us that want to educate our leaders and our legislators and our neighbors that there's a much better path available today that we can all take individual action on and move forward. But when I give this speech, people ask me, or they challenge me. You know, in the US and around the world, the utilities are some of the most politically powerful companies. They do not want local energy. Most of them do not want local energy to take off because it will reduce their revenues and their profits over time. And it will, more importantly, reduce their market power, since most of them are monopolies and face no competition. So how can we possibly create systems that can compete with regulated monopolies and giant billion-dollar corporations? Well, before I give you that answer, let me briefly explain a concept that I introduced in the book called the 5 Orders of Innovation. And this comes from my experience of being a professional venture capitalist for running strategy at IBM worldwide and having started and grown multiple companies. The first order of innovation, it's the bottom of the stack, is the creation of components. This would be small discrete pieces. In the energy business, this would be solar cells and panels or batteries. But if if you think about it from the computer industry, which I'm very familiar with, having been in it for decades, you could think of these components as Intel, who makes the microprocessors. The second order is integrations, where you take existing components and you put them together into a new and better product. As I explained throughout my book, this is one of the biggest areas of innovation that most people overlook. An example of that in the US is Dell, who takes existing components and puts them together to create computers that ended up being so competitive that Dell became a giant company, even though they were competing with established companies like IBM and others that were creating their own computers. One of my favorite stories about the power of integrations is Tesla. When they launched their Model S in 2012, they didn't have brand new battery chemistries or fantastic new magnets for their motors that no one else had. They actually went and bought all the parts for the Tesla Model S from the existing marketplace. They put them together in incredibly innovative ways and created what Car and Driver magazine calls the greatest car ever created in the history of cars. And every single part that Tesla purchased was available to Mercedes and Honda and Toyota and General Motors and Ford. Yet it was a crazy outside company that put those pieces together in a unique way that no one had ever thought of before. They used laptop batteries and people laughed at them for doing that. And yet, as we all know today, Tesla has created some of the greatest cars ever, and more importantly, has caused the entire world to realize that electric vehicles are here, that they're real, and they're a better option for our future. The third order is services. An example of this in the software computer world is Google, where you take first and second order businesses and you transform them into a service so that people pay for it or use it in small bits and they don't have to invest in the capital to create factories or to buy assets. The best example of the services for the energy industry is the grid. You don't have to buy a coal plant yourself. You don't even have to buy solar panels on your roof yourself. Someone will finance it for you, and then you can buy it by the kilowatt hour. That's a great example of the third order business. The next two orders are where it gets really exciting. And this is where venture capitalists are streaming to raising billions of dollars and then putting them into startups all over the world. In the software world, we call them platforms. This is a place where people and businesses come to transact with each other. One of the best examples of a platform is Apple's App Store, where third-party companies sell their apps and Apple gets a commission for those sales. Apple makes a fortune on this, but because people want to be on their platform, they pay that fee. One of my favorite examples in software is a company called Salesforce.com, who has a platform for managing sales, but they have turned it into a platform for the entire way of running a business. And entire publicly traded companies are built on top of software, on top of Salesforce.com software. And every time someone uses one of those products, Salesforce.com makes a little bit of money. This is an incredibly exciting place to be. And in my book, I have dozens of examples of platforms that are emerging for local energy. One of my favorite examples I refer to is choreographing electrons. Managing like a traffic cop, the stopping and starting and switching of electrons from today's grid, where it's like broadcast television or radio, where all the electrons flow from the center and they just go outwards to homes and businesses, to the new world where electrons are flowing in two ways. People are buying and trading electricity with each other, and the companies and the technologies that manage that trading are going to be incredibly successful. But nothing excites venture capitalists more than a fifth order. And this is a disruption. And a disruption is where a first, second, third, fourth order business that's existing in a single industry moves into a brand new industry that didn't see it coming and completely changes that industry. So if you think about Uber or Lyft or any of the ride-sharing companies, you can think of them really as just little applications that are running on an iPhone or an Android phone. But to the taxi industry, they changed everything and almost destroyed the taxi industry. And that dichotomy, that difference where it can be just something, a small application running on a platform in an existing software industry, but it can simultaneously disrupt and recreate and reinvent an entirely new industry around ride sharing and partial ownership of vehicles. And we're going to see in the energy industry tremendous fifth order disruptions. A good example is electric vehicles are a fifth order disruption on the oil and petroleum and gasoline companies. There's many other examples in my book. So let me explain to you how this 5 orders of innovation will allow local energy to become so successful it will be unstoppable and it will disrupt the existing monopoly electric utility industries. First of all, the cost of components is decreasing very rapidly. The price of solar since 1970s has dropped 400 times. Incredible. But it's just getting started. If you compare the price of solar to any other type of energy generation, it's on its way to being the least expensive way to generate electricity ever created. And even though there's reason to believe that nuclear will be somewhat cheaper, even at its cheapest, it'll be 3 or 4 times more expensive than solar. And batteries are declining in cost. In the last 10 years alone, batteries have declined almost 90% in cost. And as the capacity of manufacturing goes up, a concept I call economies of volume in the book, manufacturing at scale. There's many different terms to describe it, but the more factories we make, the more units we produce and the cheaper each unit gets. And in the book, I have several projections for the scale of upcoming battery factories, and it is enormous. And there's so much innovation in new battery chemistries that I get into in the book that it's inevitable that the price of batteries will become so inexpensive that it will be cost effective to pair them with solar and create local energy solutions that are significantly cheaper than the grid. And the cost of integrations is getting cheaper quickly as well. Now let's talk about local scale solar. The US is one of the most expensive places to build rooftop solar in the world, but Japan isn't much cheaper. This is some information from the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. And they mapped out the price per watt of putting solar on a roof in multiple countries. And as you can see, Japan in US dollars is $2.20. It's quite a bit more expensive in the US at $3.80. But in, for example, Australia, it's only half the price of Japan at $1.20 in US. Now, what's really interesting is that if you compare the US to Australia, this assumes that they're using the exact same parts. They're using the same solar panels like Qcell or Jinko. They're using the same inverters like SolarEdge or Enphase. And they're paying people to climb on the roof to install these things. So how is it that you could have Australian installation be twice as expensive or half the price of Japan and a third the price of the United States? What's creating this difference? It's all about something called soft costs. And in the US, we call this bureaucracy or red tape. It's unnecessary and slow regulations and policies and approvals that add so much to the cost. In fact, in most residential installations in the US, the solar panels are only 10 to 15% of the entire cost. All the rest of it is additional hardware and labor, and the largest piece is soft costs. as you can see here in this graph. It's about half the costs, and this is sourced from a different place, so the $2.71 here is equivalent to the $3.80 that IRENA used for the United States. But the idea is the same. And as you can see, soft costs are very high in small-scale solar because of all the local regulations. And Australia has made national laws that make this much easier and much more streamlined. And fortunately, the US is finally making some big moves to reduce the soft costs. In an amazing public-private partnership where governments and commercial companies have come together, they've created a free solution called Solar App Plus. This is available to any government in the United States, and if we are trying to get it connected into people in Japan through Tetsu and others so that Japanese towns and cities and villages can use this too. And the goal is to take processes that require in-person visits, that require physical paperwork, and make it all streamlined inside of an app. Pre-approving components and certain designs so that it doesn't have to be reviewed by engineers at the local county or village government. This is very exciting. And if Japan can do what the US is doing, and we can all do what Australia is doing, we are going to see the price of local energy just continue to plummet, continue to decrease, and it will be so much cheaper than any other way to generate electricity. And it all comes together in the third order, the services that are decreasing in price. This is for the US, and it shows just how far the price of middle scale electricity, like maybe on a building, has come down. In 2012, it was 24 cents US, and in 2018 to 2020, it became the same price as buying electricity from the grid. And by the middle of this decade, it will be half the price of buying electricity from the grid. And in a few decades, it will be a quarter the price of buying electricity from the grid. And I expect every other country to have the same experience so that individuals and businesses and families will look at their costs and they'll realize that they can save so much money by generating their own electricity from rooftop solar and adding batteries that they'll simply buy less and less from the grid. This is unstoppable. This means that local energy becomes irresistible. Today, the utilities are having some success in the United States fighting local energy by adding fees and making it difficult, capping the amount of connections and things like that. But as people realize in democracies that they can save a tremendous amount of money, help the environment, create resilience for their families and homes, at some point, all the laws will change, as they should, to support individuals and communities and allow them to save money, to create resilience for their families. And local energy will absolutely be an unstoppable, irresistible force. It's already happening today. And I describe this as a four-phase change. When solar was first commercial, it was expensive, and the people who installed solar 10 or 20 years ago were largely motivated to help the environment. US and Japanese and other governments decided to create economic incentives like tax incentives or grants to help accelerate solar adoption. And currently, solar is less expensive thanks to policies and subsidies and tax incentives in some places. Other places, it's already cheaper regardless of subsidies. But solar will continue to go down until it's the lowest cost source of electricity for anybody, anywhere. But it will keep going down past that, and more solar will get installed. There are credible research projects in the US that say that there is enough rooftop and parking lots available in the US to power the entire country. Not just the homes and the buildings, but to power industry, to power commercial applications. And I think in Japan, an incredibly exciting opportunity is agrovoltaics, where solar is mixed in with farmland. And there are many crops, as I discuss in my book, that actually will grow better when they're around solar panels because of the shading. And solar panels reduce the evaporation of moisture from the soil. So growing plants and solar actually is better than either one of them on the land by itself. The same goes for grazing animals. It is easy to have sheep and cows grazing on the same land where solar panels exist. In fact, they reduce one of the most expensive maintenance costs of solar, which is keeping the grasses shorter so they don't block the solar panels. I believe that Japan will lead the world in agrivoltaics because of the country's deep respect for its land and its natural heritage from its forests and its love of nature. So how do we take all this and turn it into the last goal I had for myself and for the industry? How do we make all these things create a huge financial impact? Well, in my book, I cover 50 emerging market segments, each of which is a multi-billion-dollar US dollar opportunity. Some examples include building integrated photovoltaics, making driveways and sidewalks and carports all solar powered, recycling solar, streamlining soft cost reductions, new battery and solar technologies built specifically for homes and buildings. Almost all the products today are built for utility scale and they're shrunk down but never optimized for small scales. Microgrids are going to begin to proliferate. The software needed for this is a tremendous opportunity. Same thing for monitoring and controlling these systems. Japan is one of the early places, Europe, Australia, where people are able to pioneer trading electricity with each other. This is illegal. It's against the law in the United States today, but will eventually become universally legal everywhere in the world because it is such a good solution. And I could go on, and these are just an example, but I want to finish up today with one brief example of one of my favorite and most exciting disruptions and fourth order and fifth order models. That's electric vehicles, V2G, V2H, which means vehicle to grid and vehicle to home. Up until recently, the idea of using a vehicle like a car or a truck and sending its battery power back to the grid or back to the home was a very small idea. Most people were not aware of it. But when Ford introduced their new truck, their electric truck, the Ford 150 Lightning, basically an electric version of the most popular vehicle sold in the United States, and Ford advertised, not only did this have tremendous range and power, but it could be plugged in to your home and provide backup power in the event that your home grid went offline. And for people in California and Texas who have recently dealt with outages, this is a very appealing feature. And every other company selling electric vehicles will be forced to copy this. The Nissan Leaf has always had this ability. Tesla, for reasons, decided not to offer this. I interviewed one of their executives and explained it. He explained it to me that because battery cycles are still very limited, perhaps a few thousand cycles, they didn't want customers disappointed when they powered their house and saw their car batteries wear out too soon. But the cycle count on batteries is getting better and better every year. And so it will soon not cause any reduction in the car's value to use it to power your home, not just during outages, but all the time. EVs will become an absolutely integral part of the grid, and utilities are very excited about it. In the United States, the per capita consumption of electricity has actually started shrinking over the last few years, primarily because of the efficiency of LED bulbs and efficient appliances like air conditioning and refrigerators. So electric vehicle charging is the first growth that the electricity industry has had an opportunity to see in many years. And many utilities, including the one I work with called Georgia Power, gives me a special rate to motivate me to charge my car overnight when their grid is not congested and it isn't at peak load, and they charge me much lower electricity rates to charge my car at night. And I do. I only charge my car at night unless I'm going to go for a very long trip immediately. But it gets more exciting because of the Ford 150 and other new cars coming out where they can actually take that power and send it back to the grid. Utilities are very excited about that because it means grid owners have to spend less on batteries themselves. There's many words for this, like virtual power plant, aggregation, but all of it means that these individual cars and trucks can be managed as a unit and help the grid be managed better. But I'm excited about it because the individual cars can also power the house. So it's not just to help the grid, it actually helps the house. So I would have to buy fewer residential batteries because my car is helping me store electricity from bright sunny days to where I can discharge the stored electricity overnight to power my home at night. And this is really exciting because in the United States, it is illegal for anyone other than a utility to sell a kilowatt hour. But that has recently changed, and 30 states have allowed electric vehicle charging to be priced by the kilowatt hour. This is the first time in 100 years that someone besides a utility has been able to sell a kilowatt hour. This is going to become a new way, a new door through which innovation and the sale of competitive electricity can work. There's also going to be new competitors. Royal Dutch Shell, one of the largest oil companies in the world, has said that it plans to become the largest electricity company in the world. So electric utilities are facing disruptions, not just from entrepreneurs like me, but also traditional oil companies who are typically 10 times larger and vastly more assets and capital. The electric utility business is in for a great deal of change in the next 10 years. And all of these new business models, which I talk about in the book, are some of the most exciting. Vehicle to home, something I call mobile battery to home, where the delivery vehicles like ordering from Amazon or grocery deliveries, they have large batteries and they can briefly plug into your house and charge your house battery in case it's been rainy and your solar panels haven't been able to fully charge your battery. This will be legal, it will be technically straightforward, and it's going to create hundreds of billions of dollars worth of business opportunities. So I hope that you are as excited as I am about the impact, the environmental impact and potential, the economic and entrepreneurial opportunities of local energy, and the technologies that are driving this. And I want to end with a quote from one of the most respected people that I interviewed during my book research. It's a man named Jim Rogers, who has since passed away, but at the time he was the CEO of Duke Energy, which is the largest electric utility in the United States. And he believed and loved the history of the industry. He was famous for being one of the first utility executives to acknowledge that renewable energy was the future. And he told me at dinner, he said, it's time for the power industry to become a technology business again. We are now in the age of renewables that are powered by technologies and not fuels. Small-scale energy is going to transform and disrupt everything we've taken for granted in the electricity industry for a century. And I'm very excited to bring some of these ideas to all of you today in this call and to any of you that read the book. Japan is a tremendous innovator, whether it's consumer electronics or automobiles and fantastic quality. The inventions and visions of Japan have transformed the world. And I hope through agrivoltaics and rooftop solar that Japan will do the same to inspire and drive the world in local renewable energy. Thank you very much for having me today.
Bill どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you, Bill.
Hello.
So So he's participating, joining us face to face now. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your participation. So as I said in the beginning, so this freeing energy book, and this is an eye-catching title, and because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the Germany then said that they are going to accelerate towards renewable, 100% renewable. And in that statement, Christian Robert, someone, I forgot the name of the Minister for Economy, said that the renewable energy is an energy of freedom. And that is in the larger context of the state relations, but this freeing energy, the bill proposed in this book has some commonality with that statement. So once again, I'd like to ask Bill why you titled this book as Freeing Energy.
Thank you. And again, it's a real honor to be here today. And I'm excited to share the book. I want to thank Tetsu and his colleagues for their tremendous support in translating it. I'm so excited and so honored. And to answer your question, I liked freeing energy because energy is trapped. It's stuck in so many ways. It needs to be free or unleashed from fossil fuels. I think that's the biggest thing we need to free energy from. We need to free energy from utilities and the monopolies in Japan and the US and most of the world. And the part that I get very excited about is freeing energy from giant corporations and governments and letting energy be like gardens where families and communities and individuals can make their own decisions and produce their own resources. So there's very few things in the world that are as trapped and regulated as energy and electricity. And so we can free it, we will change the world. And that's why I called the book Freeing Energy.
Thank you very much. Another main concept of this book is that, of course, Bill shares with me the sense of crisis on climate change, but the book is not about climate change or climate action, but when it comes to climate change, then the people would say that the renewables are important, but also the nuclear is important. That would, make the energy again trapped in what you say as being trapped. And the renewable energies is the energy that has the possibility and potential, and it also has a very big business potential, as Bill said in his lecture. So this is the focus of the book and the focus of your thinking. And so the climate change and energy and economy and the relationship with communities, if you could explore about those relationships once again, that would be appreciated.
The energy has been owned and operated by corporations and governments for 100, 200 years. And it evolved because the only way to lower the price of oil and gas and electricity was to build larger and larger systems, larger refineries, larger drilling, larger mining, larger power plants. And for hundreds of years, energy was defined and locked by economies of scale. And this is the first time in the history of energy, or at least the first time since humans were burning wood in fires from trees, that individuals can control and make their own energy. And it isn't just about electricity. It's also about gasoline and diesel. It's also about uranium. Japan imports 100% of its uranium for its nuclear power plants. And in order to generate energy, for 100 years, Japan and other countries were entirely dependent on gigantic companies and enormous government policies. And both the United States and Japan get all their nuclear materials from foreign countries. And so we are able to, with small scale renewables, to gain true independence, not just for families and communities, but as countries. And that's another reason that I call it freeing energy. It's freeing countries from the dependence on other countries for things like uranium. And so renewable energy at small scales turns the energy rules of 100 years upside down. May I comment on Germany? Because
please do that.
I wrote an article today I published, and the title was that is that Vladimir Putin may have done more to accelerate renewable energy through his horrible actions in Ukraine than all the marches and the speeches at COP26. Because he's a terrible person doing terrible things, but he has reminded the world, he's united the world against him and reminded us that fossil fuels are not just dirty and environmentally damaging, but they are also the tools of autocrats and despots. And so now there's one more incredibly big reason for Europe and the US and Japan to accelerate the transition towards clean energy, renewable energy. But many people are saying that the answer is to use nuclear power. Nuclear is cleaner. It doesn't rely on Russia for gas and oil. But it's another sad, tragic irony that on March 4th, all the world's news headlines was a burning nuclear power plant in the Ukraine. The Zaporizhia nuclear plant was burning. And every newscast in the United States was saying, well, it probably won't melt down. It should be safe. And many people have forgotten how terrifying it was as we watched Fukushima, especially not in Japan. And this was a terrible reminder in Ukraine that people are very uncomfortable with nuclear power. And so even though many politicians and many electric utilities in governments will be saying we should think about nuclear power to move away from fossil fuels, I believe that the citizens will remember those pictures from March 4th, those newscasts from March 4th of the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in Ukraine, and say, I don't want that in my backyard. I don't want one of those plants near me, because I remember what it felt like when I was worried, especially in Europe. And they will remember that very few of the countries that use the most nuclear, like France, Japan, and the US, none of these countries don't have their own uranium. They have to get it from other countries. Those countries are like Canada and Australia, which are less threatening than Russia. But why should any country make its energy system dependent on other countries? And renewable energy makes countries independent. And local energy goes one step further by making communities and families independent. And that's the best of all.
Thank you very much. As for nuclear power generation, Japan and European countries, we have seen the hike of the oil price and such, and triggered by this issue of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, attack. Many people have realized that we have to depart from all fuel and also nuclear power generation. And Japan has experienced a really terrible accident in Fukushima, and Fukushima type of meltdown can be easily taking place. And we have really saw that precarious situation back in 2011. So this situation is quite, really alarming. There are some people saying that we have to resume the power generation in nuclear power plant. But looking at the situation taking place in Ukraine, I hope the people will change their mind. And talking about Germany, so they have actually claimed a 10-point proposal, and climate change minister have just said that in the peak season in winter, the natural gas is quite critical. But in order to change that frame, that it will take whole 1 year. So the Germany people have just said that it's not realistic to resume the nuclear power plant right now.
So another question to Bill, as you pointed out too, so you made successes in the IT world and then shifted to energy field. So what are the commonalities between the two and the differences, I think? And as you pointed out in your lecture, so when you compare the IT world and the energy industry, what strikes you the most as the biggest commonalities and the biggest differences?
I love that question, Tetsu. I have thought for years about the similarities. What lessons can we learn from the IT industry that can teach us about the future of the electricity industry? And I have so many stories, but let me answer simply with one story. That my very first interview for my book was Amory Lovins, the founder of Rocky Mountain Institute. Many of you know him and respect him, and he has been an inspiration to me. And I told him I wanted to get into clean energy. And he told me that many people from the IT industry fail when they move into energy because they don't understand regulation. They don't understand assets and infrastructure. So he said, Bill, I'm very pleased that you're going to write a book first because you will understand the industry and not make bad decisions about how to influence change and build businesses in energy. And there are many ways that energy and IT computers are similar. The computers and internet are driven by technology. Costs have always been declining. The products are always getting better. We refer to this, you may know the term Moore's Law. The price of microchips goes down very quickly over time, very predictably. And what's amazing to me and inspiring and exciting is that the electricity industry for a century has been a business about fuels, coal, natural gas, oil, uranium. But in the last few years, it is starting to become an industry about technology. And as I said in my final presentation earlier, that the CEO of the largest electric utility in the United States, a great man named Jim Rogers, who's since passed away, he told me, Bill, it's time for the power industry to become a technology business again. But I don't think even he appreciated just how different that is. And just like Amory Lovins told me that, Bill, you don't understand assets and regulations, I have found that many people in the power industry do not understand technology. They don't understand how to plan for businesses when the prices decline every single year, year after year after year. They don't understand that you can make decisions and you can fix mistakes. They don't understand that entrepreneurs can try things and build small companies that can grow big or fail. They don't understand any of this because it's never happened in oil, gas, coal, nuclear, transmission. Never before have any of these industries, energy industries, been technology businesses first. And what's going to happen is, as solar and batteries are technologies and not fuels, the electricity industry is going to start moving very, very quickly. It's barely changed for 100 years. And in the next 5 years, it's going to change very quickly. Now, utilities prefer very large wind farms, very large solar farms, because it's another kind of power plant. It requires economies of scale, government support, huge capital investments. And so the technology can continue to move slowly if they can control it. But local energy, small scale systems, rooftop solar, community energy, agrivoltaics, these can all move very quickly. Innovation can happen anywhere. Tetsu and I could find a garage like Steve Jobs and Wozniak when they started Apple, and we could invent something new for $100,000 US, and it could change the entire industry. And that's never happened in the history of energy. And and no one who writes policy, no one who plans the grid has any idea this innovation wave is coming. And that's why I wrote the book, because I want the industry to know that change is coming and they can't control it. I want them to embrace the change rather than fight it. Utilities can play an important role in the new generation of innovation, but most will not. Most will fight it. Most will fight it, and they will become like AT&T in the United States, the telecom monopoly that was once the mightiest company in the world. And people said, we don't want you to be a monopoly, and AT&T fought it. They lost, and AT&T became so unimportant, and they lost their scale and importance. And utilities will probably go the same way. And local energy, much more than renewable energy, is going to force change in the industry. And that's the biggest lesson from IT that I can share. If you make a better product in your garage, you can change the entire industry.
今のビルのメッセージは非常に重要なですね、本質的なポ
The
イント。
message sent from Bill was quite essential for us to understand. Yeah, actually, Bill used the whole one chapter. The chapter name is From the Fuel to Technology. fossil fuel and uranium that is to be dig up from the underground. That was the major fuel that we have utilized for the last 100 years, but that is now causing harm to the environment as well as to the humans. Right now, we have all technologies right there. And in the technology field, the Moore's law is actually working. And because of that, the price of the components are coming down year by year. So this is a real great change in the human history right now. So why not we cannot use this chance to promote renewable energy? And Bill, praised that Japan is quite an innovator country. I really appreciate that. But one of the reasons why the power cost is really expensive is because of the soft cost. And this soft cost concept is introduced in Bill's book. And there is a myth there in the soft cost. And the solar power, many people might think it's still very expensive, but the price itself is coming down year by year. And some people say the solar power generation will entail a huge areas, but it's not right now because of thanks to technologies and advancement. And also there are some voice telling us that we don't have enough rare metal. And I have got a question from the audience that lithium and other rare metal, how we should consider that that is actually used in the batteries. So there are a lot of myths going around in the world. So including that, the resources, would you please touch upon these points?
Yes, there's a whole chapter in my book about myths and misinformation that makes solar power and batteries look uncompetitive and even unsuccessful and even frightening. And some of these myths are honest misunderstandings, but many myths are pushed and promoted by opponents of renewable energy and local energy. And I spent a year looking at research and numbers and spreadsheets to try to address and fix the myths that are the most popular. And one myth that you mentioned, Tetsu, is the rare metals for batteries. And let me give you some thoughts on that. If you think about fuels, and that's how most people think about energy, if I have a natural gas plant, there's no other way for me to use it other than to put natural gas into it. I can't put coal into a natural gas plant. I can't put uranium into a natural gas plant. There's only one way to make electricity with a natural gas plant. But if I want to store energy in a battery, there's hundreds, thousands, an infinite number of ways to store energy. And so today, lithium-ion batteries are very popular, and particularly NMC technology, NMC chemistries, and the rare metals needed for that are potentially running into short supply. But people forget that if we run low on nickel, we can invent new kinds of batteries. We don't have to use any particular rare metal if we run out or it becomes expensive. We can find another kind of metal. So as nickel and cobalt became very expensive, many companies, BYD in China and Tesla in the US, created equally good batteries around other chemistries like lithium iron phosphate. And we have so many more opportunities to be creative and innovative in how we store the electricity and which raw materials, rare materials we need. We're not stuck on any particular source of raw materials. The same goes for solar. Solar cells use silver, and that's I think 15 to 20% of the silver in the world is used to make solar cells. And people are concerned that if we make more solar cells, we won't be able to produce enough silver. But this is an industry I know very well. I have a startup in this field, and we are figuring out ways to make solar cells without any silver at all. It's still a cell in the sun generating electricity, but we have so many ways to make a cell. If silver becomes expensive or hard to find, we'll make the cell another way. So I actually believe that for the same reason that the world has not run out of oil and the world has not run out of natural gas, because people are just very creative at finding ways to mine and drill, we will not run out of these other raw materials that are needed for cars, EVs, and solar and batteries. But because we have so much flexibility in how we manufacture solar and batteries, I believe that we can become even less environmentally harmful. And my favorite part, my absolute favorite part, is if I burn a gallon of gas to move my car, that's gone forever. I can't recycle a gallon of gas once it's been burned. I can't recycle natural gas after it's been turned into heat and electricity. But I can recycle nickel. I can recycle cobalt. I can recycle silver forever. And the technologies for recycling these raw materials. I don't know if this saying works in Japan, but in the United States, we talk about eating breakfast, and we say that the chicken is involved and the pig is committed. I apologize if that metaphor doesn't work in Japan, but people in the United States laugh a lot at that metaphor. And what it means is that when I use fuels, I can only use them once, and then they're gone forever. If I'm using the raw materials in solar and batteries, I can use them over and over and over and over until 1 billion years. They need to be recycled, but their value is always present. So it's a completely different supply chain, a completely different economic model when you talk about the raw materials for renewable energy than when you talk about fuels.
ありがとうございます。ですね。
Thank you very much.
あと先ほどビルの話の中に農地が活用できる。
You talk about this agrivoltaic solar, and we would like to expand this as much as possible because we have some limitations to the land available in the US. 100 mile by 100 mile area will be available. In Japan, 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers. A plot of land, which is the abandoned agricultural land that can be used for agrivoltaic solar. And in Japan, we have received 2 more questions, and one is that about the spread of the batteries in Japan is not progressing so fast. And Hawaiian power episode that you referred to in your book, Smart Export, by utilizing the solar power and then the batteries. So the power can be purchased in the evening and at night in that system in order to spread solar power batteries in the future. Can you refer to that Hawaiian power example, and also other things that we should do, maybe that include the EVs and other stuff that you refer to in your lecture?
When solar rooftop by itself is entirely dependent on the grid, and it creates real challenges for grid operators, whether it's rooftop solar or large-scale utility solar. Batteries change everything. They allow the utilities and they allow homes and communities to control how the solar is consumed. And it's like making a recording and playing the solar back later. And that means that provides an entirely different set of opportunities. It removes most of the challenges that are associated with solar by itself. And Hawaii, because electricity is so expensive there, has been forced to deal with solar adoption faster than any other state in the US. Citizens of Hawaii don't want to pay expensive grid electricity. They want solar. And so many people in Hawaii adopted solar that the grid became unstable. And instead of giving up, Hawaii created very pioneering and very creative policies that acknowledged that people wanted solar, but said you have to do solar in a way that's compatible with the grid. And so they created policies like that allowed the grid to be more of a backup. They are creating incentives for people to put batteries in their homes and helping them pay for those batteries in exchange for having some control over the batteries so that it helps the grid remain stable. And this is an idea that utilities fight every time, because people don't often realize that the entire grid is a single analog circuit. It's just one giant set of wires all connected together at one time. And so if you do something of concern on one part of the grid, it affects the other part of the grid. And people forget that, or the utilities want to maintain very tight control over this so that the grid doesn't get disrupted. And the grid operators will tell you that they can't possibly control all these batteries and all these solar systems. It's too complicated, they say. No one can manage to handle thousands or millions of solar panels. Don't make us do it. The grid will become unstable. The utilities will say. And I tell the utilities that, have you heard of cloud computing in the IT world? You know, companies like Google and Microsoft are managing tens and hundreds of millions of servers simultaneously. And there is so much technology and research that shows that you can control hundreds of millions of systems simultaneously. The utilities just don't want to do it. But other industries have been very, very successful at coordinating among millions of different devices. And the electricity industry will do that too. And what's really exciting to me is it's not just solar and it's not just residential batteries, but it's also electric vehicles. And the utilities complain that this makes it even more complicated for them. And I would tell utilities that this is more of an opportunity to create a system that I call the Internet of Energy. And every other industry, AT&T with telephones and IBM with mainframe computers, these old companies said, we can't possibly control and organize many small systems. It's too complicated. And yet that's absolutely what happened. And the electricity industry has an amazing opportunity to look at all these small systems, the EVs, EV charging, small batteries, putting EVs back into the grid, V2G. And this is not a problem, it's an opportunity. And when utilities master this, or we as innovators help them master it, the grid will become more stable, not less. And the costs of the grid will go down, not up. And I think that utilities may wait until entrepreneurs force them to accept that these small distributed systems are actually cheaper, more resilient than the grid that the utilities want to maintain.
ありがとうございます。予定した時間が
Thank you very much. The scheduled finish time is actually, coming up. But I would like to address another point. That is the thing written in this book, and then that gave me a great hope. For the past few years, the great technology advancement was observed. However, the industry of electricity have stayed all the same for the 100 years. Going forward, IDC and battery technologies and such, with those technologies around the local energy concept, we can make a lot of improvement or progress in the coming years. And that was actually proposed and suggested by Bill. And the clean tech innovation 5 orders, that is also explained in his book. And this concept is going to be quite critical for many people to refer to. So before closing, I would like to ask Bill to explain the possibility of the promising future in relation with these 5 orders. In this book, he wrote a lot of examples. So would you please elaborate the importance of these 5 orders concept?
When I spoke with venture capital investors and people in the government who are excited about the future of clean, renewable energy, I was disappointed and frustrated that many really didn't understand the differences between different types of clean energy businesses and business models. And as I spoke with them, it became clear to me that there was an underlying model that very few people understood. And I spent a year looking at other industries and creating what I call the 5-order model. And I think it's a useful model because it helps you see the evolution of the industry, and it helps governments and policymakers and investors understand how the industry is evolving and where the investments are best made, how investments are best made. And so today, the electricity industry is largely at the 1st and 2nd order. we're making first order is components like batteries and solar cells and panels. The second order is integrations of those systems, like a Tesla Powerwall, when we weave together the systems and create a new one. The third order is where we create services. The grid itself is a third order service, where I think that it gets very exciting for more investors and more innovators is the fourth order, where you start to get away from the constraints of building and owning infrastructure, building and owning assets, because you're able to create value for everyone without necessarily just building more hardware. And the fourth order is we're just starting to see businesses that are creating fourth order value in energy. For example, virtual power plants, VPP, is a good example of a fourth order business. But this industry is so new, local energy is so new, that we need innovation at every level. And we need startups, and we need government research funding, and we need universities, and we need organizations like yours, Tetsu, to think about all 5 levels. We need new components and new battery chemistries. We need new types of solar panels, like building integrated photovoltaics, where windows and roofs become a photo generator, electricity generators. We need agrivoltaics. We need the new financing models and capital models that allow us to make these systems affordable to people who can't afford them. And then the fourth order, we need systems to control all this. We need ways to optimize batteries so they last longer and produce more value. There's just so many opportunities. And as we wrap up, I would just like to add one other thought. I think that Japan is a country that I love, and I have been to Japan many times, and I hope to come to Japan soon as COVID goes away. But I think Japan has been one of the most innovative countries in the world in so many ways. Consumer electronics, and Japan innovated automobiles. Honda and Toyota were the first reliable, affordable cars in the world. All we own is Hondas in my family. And Japan led the world in solar panels for many years. It's one of the leaders today in batteries. And I believe that Japan is the best country in the world to pull all this together to make a single piece, because automobiles and batteries and solar panels and electronics, this is local energy. There's really no better country to make local energy work. And you have some good policies, better than the US, but not as good as it needs to make local energy successful. And I hope that you can convince your political leaders and your policymakers to embrace local energy, not because it's going to help the world, although that's important, not because it's environmental and helps climate change, although that's essential, but maybe the Japanese leaders will just say that local energy allows Japan to dominate the world in one of the most important technology changes. Local energy will create more jobs in Japan than almost any other industry that Japan could create. And it will give Japan energy independence, more than any fossil fuel and more than nuclear. Local energy, renewable energy, agrivoltaics will give Japan energy independence. And all political leaders like to hear that: jobs, independence, and profits. So I hope that some people are able to listen to this conversation today, and maybe with the book in Japanese, some of the leaders will get excited about it and listen to you, Tetsu, and your colleagues. And I would love to see Japan show the world what's possible with local energy. And I thank all of you for your tremendous leadership and your support of the book and for your support of local energy. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。ちょうど日本の皆さんへのメッセージも。
Thank you very much. And you also left us the message for the Japanese audience. And thank you very much for that. And I'm sorry, we are 5 minutes over time, but there was one question left unanswered. And I actually answered that question in the chat box. So please understand. So this was a seminar to commemorate this Japanese version the publication of the book Freeing Energy. And I hope you all purchase one. And Bill and ISEP, not just, for the translation project for this book, and I don't know if we can be these Steve Jobs and the Wozniak, but we would like to work together so that we can change the energy in Japan and in the world. And my house actually has the solars on the rooftop. And then the V2H is now being realized by utilizing the Nissan Leaf. So it's halfway the free energy. But when you experiment with it, you find very many inconveniences, and it's probably something the Steve Jobs and the Wozniak were experiencing in their garage, and very similar to the times when the computer was being developed. And we will need to work on the costs so that we can reduce the costs further. And we also would like to make sure that the people in their localities, in their communities can work on their own energy and make it their job. And towards that goal, we would like to continue working with Bill. And thank you very much, Bill, for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you. じゃあどうも皆さんありがとうございました。ではこ
Thank
れ
you
で。
very much. So this closes the seminar. Thank you for your participation.